Welcome to the Infinite Podcast. My name is Carlos Andres Ruiz, and today I am not with my wife, Melissa Ruiz Vasquez. But what I want to do today is start a series of conversations in which I refer to them as infinite conversations, timeless conversations. These are conversations that sit with me deeply, and sometimes my wife says, hey, is there a way that you can share this with others? And here's the time to do it. You know, in the summer, I have a lot of summer programs, and when they're 3 hours long, I give my athletes a break. And in between the break, I give them a question. And one of the questions that I normally ask them is, if you could have your dream job tomorrow, what would it be? And when they tell me their answers, I encourage them to, what's the one thing that we could do today so that we could get closer to that? Or I'll try to point out what is something that they already have that actually reflects these answers. But there was one answer in particular that really hit me one time. And it was one of these athletes said, hey, I want to be an interior designer. And something about those two words coming together hit me in a specific way. And I realized that I want to be an interior designer as well, but not necessarily of furniture and of homes. I feel so deeply convicted to be an interior designer for the human soul and the human mind. And if just for a moment, I can just walk into this intimate space and maybe help you reposition the way you look at yourself, the way you look at others, and the way you look at God. I like to call these infinite conversations because I genuinely think that this is not a conversation that I'm just having now in my lifetime, but I think it's a human conversation that way before I came onto this earth and many years after me, it's a conversation that internally our souls are going to have. So when I was thinking about what's the proper conversation to begin with, what came to me is let's talk about the beginning. Let's talk about the starting point. As a mental performance coach, when I work with athletes one-on-one, it's really important that I dive in and ask them, where are you now before we start to take steps into where is the destination that we want to go? It is so important to understand where you are today. If there's two things that I completely believe in as a human is one, God, and two, the GPS. Without the GPS, I would not be able to execute my job. What's interesting about the GPS is that you need to have a starting location and you need to have a destination. And it's very similar when I work with athletes in the sense that if I have a destination that I want to go to, but the location that I start from is not the location from where I am, the beginning of this journey is going to be so difficult. Just think about it. If you want to go to Canada and you put New York as your starting location, but you're actually in Boston, it's going to be really difficult to actually get on that path. In fact, the beginning of that journey might be so confusing that you might actually give up on the journey. And so today, I just want to talk about the beginning. I want to talk about where our stories start, and not just our stories individually, but the human story. If we can figure out where it actually starts, I'm convinced that it can actually impact the way in which we attain or achieve or get to the places in which we desire to get. So many religions begin with the story of Adam and Eve. And we begin with the story of Adam and Eve coming short and making a mistake. And God tells them to do something, and they do not do what God asked them to do. And then from there on, religion and spiritual spaces and a lot of humanity has decided to believe that we start from this fall. I wonder if there's another place that actually is more accurate of a start, because I'm convinced that the accuracy of your starting location is actually what determines the quality of your journey. I wonder if instead of starting from the fall, we flip the page backwards and we realize that when we were created, we were actually called good. In fact, not just good, we were called very good. And I don't know about you, but when I am doing anything that I know I'm good at, I perform significantly better than when I do something that I don't feel comfortable with or that I don't feel that I'm good enough to execute. And so our starting location is not the fall. The problem with starting with the fall is that we feel the need to make up for our mistake. But if we started from our actual starting location, we know that good is actually built into us. And it's not that we have to work for good, it's more that we just have to activate the good that is already in us. When I talk to my players at halftime, it's so easy for them to pick out the things that they could have done better. There's something about us that we just choose to pick at the things that are not good enough. I don't know if it's because we were conditioned that way. I don't know if this narrative of us starting from when we disobeyed God is actually what has been informed us as humans. But for some reason, even with young players, when I ask them, how was the half? Immediately, they begin with, we could have done this better. It's a beautiful posture of wanting to grow and wanting to improve. But what if what would really impact the second half is picking out what you're good at and just simply recreate those? It's much easier to know that there's things that you know how to do well versus walking back into the second half thinking that, hey, there was only things that I didn't do well. It's more of a human inability to pick out the right things or to pick out the good things before we dive into the mistakes. And I genuinely believe that it is connected to the way that we have told ourselves that the story starts at the fall, which then calls for us to reevaluate the narrative of this origin story. The starting point is so important because it impacts the totality of your journey. So let's just replay the narrative for a moment. And let's go back to this origin story in which God gives us everything with one restriction, which is to not have from this one specific tree. Why would God give us the opportunity to come short? It sounds counterproductive to me. Like if I was to tell you at this moment, don't think about a red elephant, you're probably going to think about a red elephant. And so when God tells us don't have from this tree, it's almost like there's a seed planted in us. It's like, oh, what if I have from this tree? And this leads me to wonder if God putting this tree there was not God trying to test us on our obedience. In the beginning, where everything was perfect, I wonder if love still had not been activated because there hadn't been any mistakes. I wonder if love can only exist in places in which it's not deserved. I wonder if sometimes we try to impose on God our human perspective. If I tell a player, the young players, hey, don't do this, and they end up doing it, I would immediately call them disobedient, and I would immediately look for something that they should do because they were not obedient. And so I think that it's us imposing our human narrative on God in the first test that he gave us. And it's not that obedience is not a reflection of love. Obedience can reflect love, but obedience does not capture the fullness of love. In Scripture, we're told that God is love significantly more times than God is obedience. I choose to believe that if God was going to choose one thing to start our human story, it would be with a test of love and not a test of obedience. How would this starting point change the fullness of the human story if this test was actually created for us to come short? If this test was actually created for Adam and Eve to make the mistake? Because I choose to believe that the reason that God told them not to have from this tree was not because they were not going to have from this tree or because he was hoping that we didn't have from this tree. In fact, I think he was banking on the fact that we would have from this tree, because the moment that we had from this tree, we actually activated the opportunity for love. And so this test was not of obedience. This test was a test of love. And is it possible that what God was looking for was not for us to not have from the tree, but instead be able to run back to him in the moment in which we do have from the tree? I'm not a father yet, but I often think about the dynamic of being a parent. And I think about a moment in which my son or daughter will come short of what I ask of them. I sometimes go even further and forget what I asked or didn't ask. I think about a moment in which my son or daughter have, for whatever reason, activated the worst version of themselves. And then I land at the question, would I want my son or daughter in their worst moments, in the moments in which they're not sure if what they did was good or they know that it was extremely bad, would I want them to come and share that with me, or would I want them to hide? Every time that I think of this scenario, I long to create a relationship with my children in which the moments in which they feel they are the worst versions of themselves, they can run to me. And how is that different from this origin story at the garden? the moment in which we made a mistake, a moment in which we felt like we were confused and we were guilty. And if you become God for a second, wouldn't you rather your children run and embrace you? And so that leads me to believe that the objective was not to activate obedience in our human story, but the objective was to activate love, because love can only exist when it's not deserved. And how would that change your reality today? Today, my wife was working on a flyer that we send out for our summer programs, and she realized that she made a mistake. And she was so hard on herself. How could I miss this? How could I get this wrong? And she made another mistake at some point earlier today, and I think she was overwhelmed by the amount of mistakes that she came across in just one day or 1 week. And for me, just thinking about this internal conversation, every single mistake that you make, it's a beautiful opportunity to activate love. And when we think about this, I wonder if we only see it as outward love. I wonder if maybe you don't have to reposition how you look at others. Maybe you're so forgiving to others and you are so patient and empathetic with others, but are you the same with you? How would this point of view change the way you look at yourself? If every time you made a mistake, you remembered that this is an opportunity to love yourself more. Part of my passion for interior designing and the interior repositioning of your mind and your thoughts and your feelings is I would love for every human to be able to love themselves more, love others more, and know that God is madly in love with them. But I'm convinced that this all is dictated by your ability to understand your starting location. And I wonder if this new accuracy of your starting location can actually activate the fullness of your human experience. And as we begin this journey in reshuffling some of our internal thoughts and redesigning our interior, my hope is that you start an internal conversation. We always hear that we want to get closer to God, and we want to hear God's voice, and we want to know what He thinks of us. And at least in my experience, the one way that I hear God the most is in my internal dialogues. Because when I search deep down into this universe that lives inside of me, I run into this God that reminds me that the starting point was not Him seeking obedience, but Him seeking an opportunity for Him to activate His love towards me. The story doesn't begin with obedience. The story begins with the test of love. And so as we leave this moment and have a bit of an interior shuffling, and knowing that where a story begins actually has the power to activate not only the fullness of our human existence, but the fullness of love. How would shifting your minds from a point of view of the origin story is not a test of obedience, but a test of love, and knowing that, in fact, God intended for us to fail that first obedience test in order for love to be activated. How can you activate that into your everyday? Every moment that somebody lets you down is not a moment in which they disobeyed you, but it's a moment in which they activated the opportunity for you to love them. Every moment that you let yourself down is not a moment to step on yourself or believe less on yourself. In fact, it's a moment which you have activated the opportunity to love yourself. How are all these moments of coming short actually turned into a moment of opportunity for love? I think that's the real story of creation and its creator. It's a love story. It's a love letter between us coming short and God constantly coming for us. And in fact, the more mistakes we make, the more that we give God the opportunity to love us back. And if we are the closest reflection of God here on earth, why don't we just take on that same role? And the moment that we make mistakes and others make mistakes, we choose to believe that they have activated love. Thank you so much for joining us in the Infinite Podcast. We are so excited to continue these infinite conversations in which I get to live this dream of being an interior designer and just stepping and invading your mind and soul and trying to reposition the way that you love yourself, the way that you love others, and the way that you know that God loves you. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.